There is a valley in southern Minnesota that is far too big for the river inside it. Stand at the edge of the bluff here and you look down on a broad green trench, 5 miles across in places, and at the bottom of it, a slow brown river that could never have dug such a thing. The valley is a fossil. It was carved by a flood that has been gone for 9,000 years. This is where we walk today. We are at Williams Nature Center, a 65-acre county park a few miles southwest of Mankato in Blue Earth County, Minnesota. It sits on the lip of the Minnesota River Valley, just upstream of where the Blue Earth River comes in from the south. The trail is short, about 2 miles, paved and almost level, and it leads to 2 observation platforms. One looks out over the Minnesota River. The other hangs above the wooded gorge of Minneopa Creek. It is a modest place, 1.5 miles of sealed path, a log cabin, a few benches, and the sound of traffic on Highway 68 fading behind the trees. You could walk it in under an hour, but almost nothing you can see from these 2 overlooks is ordinary. The rock, the river, the shape of the ground, the name of the town on the far bank, all of it carries a story that is much older and much heavier than the trail suggests. Start with the ice. During the last glaciation, a great tongue of the continental ice sheet, called the Des Moines Lobe, pushed down out of the northwest across this country. It reached its farthest limit roughly 14,000 years ago, spilling south into Iowa. It was not thin. It ground over the old land, buried the bedrock, and left behind a mantle of gray and brown clay and stone, full of shale it had scraped from the Dakotas and Canada on the way. That is what our boots are on. The ground beneath this paved path is glacial till, an unsorted stew of clay, sand, gravel, and boulders dumped straight out of melting ice. It is the reason southern Minnesota is so flat and so absurdly fertile, and why the fields around Mankato grow some of the richest corn on earth. The whole prairie tabletop we are standing on is essentially the floor of a vanished glacier, softened by 10,000 years of grass. As the ice pulled back north, its meltwater had nowhere to go. The land still tilted toward the retreating glacier, so the water pooled against the ice front and formed a lake. Geologists call it Lake Agassiz, after the Swiss scientist Louis Agassiz. At its greatest, it was enormous, larger than all of the modern Great Lakes put together, a shallow inland sea of gray meltwater lying across what is now northwestern Minnesota, North Dakota, and a huge piece of Canada. Then, around 11,700 years ago, the southern rim gave way. The lake breached a moraine at Traverse Gap, near what is now Browns Valley, and poured out to the southeast. The outflow river has a name, Glacial River Warren. It ran for thousands of years, and it cut a bed up to 5 miles wide and around 250 feet deep. That trench runs southeast to Mankato, then swings northeast toward the Twin Cities. which is to say the valley we are looking into was not made by the Minnesota River. It was inherited by it. Near the Great Bend at Mankato, the trench is on the order of 200 feet deep, and the modern river wanders along the bottom of it like a shoelace in a shoebox. Geologists call this an underfit stream. When River Warren finally found a northern outlet and switched off, roughly 9,400 years ago, it left the plumbing behind. The flood cut deep enough to expose something much older. In the bluffs around Mankato, you can read a stack of sedimentary rock laid down in warm, shallow seas roughly 500 million years ago, when this part of the continent sat near the equator. From the bottom up it goes Jordan sandstone, then the blue earth siltstone, then Winota dolomite, the hard gray stone that has been quarried around here for generations and used in buildings across the region. That is the architecture of the whole valley. The soft sandstone gives way in slumps, so it forms the low ground. The dolomite is stubborn, so it holds up the rim and stands in ledges along the valley walls. Every bluff you see from these overlooks is that same simple argument between a rock that erodes and a rock that will not. The trees are just decoration on top of a 500 million year old shelf. Now look south toward the confluence. The Blue Earth River joins the Minnesota at Mankato, and its name is literal. In a shaly layer of the bluff along that stream, there is a seam of bluish-green earth, and the Sisseton Dakota gathered it and used it as a pigment. The Dakota name for the place is Mankato. Maka is earth. To is blue. Mankato, blue earth. The name is a description of the ground itself. The town on the other side of the water is called Mankato, with an N. That N is a mistake. When the name was written down by settlers, the H in Mankato was misread as an N, and nobody ever corrected it. So a city of about 45,000 people carries a Dakota word for blue clay, misspelled permanently. It is a small thing. It is also, in a way, the whole history of this valley compressed into one letter. When the flood shut off and the climate warmed, the land filled in. Tallgrass prairie took the uplands, bluestem and Indian grass standing higher than a person. Bison moved through it. In the sheltered valleys and along the streams, where fire could not reach so easily, hardwood forest held on, oak and basswood and elm. That patchwork of prairie above and woodland in the folds is exactly the landscape this trail still preserves in miniature. People have been in this valley for thousands of years, following that same edge between grassland and timber. What we are walking through is not wilderness in the sense of empty land. It is homeland. Long before there was a county, a highway, or a paved trail, the bluffs above the Great Bend of the Minnesota were lived in, hunted, gathered, mourned in, and named. And they were named precisely in Dakota. This is Dakota land. The Dakota people, the eastern bands of the Osti-Sakowin, have their homeland across this river country, and they are here today in Minnesota and beyond, as living communities and sovereign nations, not as a chapter in a book. The valley below us was a corridor of that world. It carried travel, camps, sugar bush in spring, hunting in the fall. The blue earth in the bank was a resource with a name. Then the river became a road for someone else. French traders came up the Minnesota in the 1700s and 1800s looking for furs, and the valley turned into a trade artery, with posts, credit, debt, and steadily increasing pressure from the east. The Minnesota River was navigable by steamboat as far as Mankato when the water was high. That fact, more than anything, is what set the next century in motion. The fur trade is often told as adventure. It was mostly bookkeeping. Traders advanced goods against next season's furs, the ledgers grew, and the debts became a lever. When treaty money finally arrived, traders lined up first and took their cut off the top, often on claims nobody could check. That system, the ledger and the lever, is the quiet machinery behind everything that happened in this valley in the middle of the 19th century. In 1851, the machinery did its work. 2 treaties were signed that year, one at Traverse des Sioux, a short way down this same river, and one at Mendota. The United States wanted southern Minnesota opened for settlement. The Dakota were pressured and were negotiating under the threat of force and the weight of trader debt. What they signed away is difficult to hold in the mind. At Traverse des Sioux, the Sisseton and Wahpeton bands ceded around 21 million acres for $1,665,000. That is roughly 7.5 cents an acre. Together, the 2 treaties gave up something like 24 million acres. The Dakota were left a strip of reservation land along the Minnesota River, about 150 miles long and 20 miles wide. Then the Senate struck out even that provision. And the money mostly did not arrive. The government retained more than 80% of the promised sum, paying out only interest at 5%, spread across 50 years. Much of what did come was routed straight to traders. Within a decade, the Dakota had lost the land, had not been paid for it, were confined to a narrow strip beside this river, and were being told to farm ground they had not chosen. Then came the failure. Crops failed in 1861. The winter that followed was hard and the game was thin. In the summer of 1862, the annuity payment was late again, and the agent, Thomas Galbraith, would not release the food in the agency warehouse without it. When asked whether the traders would extend credit to hungry families, one of them, Andrew Myrick, is recorded as saying, "Let them eat grass." On the 17th of August, 1862, 4 young Dakota men killed 5 settlers at Acton. The next day, a faction led by Little Crow attacked the Lower Sioux Agency. The war that followed lasted about 6 weeks along this river. Hundreds of settlers were killed. Soldiers were killed. Dakota people were killed. Dakota families who had opposed the fighting were caught in it too. By late September, the fighting was over and the reprisals began. A military commission began sitting on the 28th of September. It tried 392 Dakota men. Some trials took only minutes. There was no defense counsel. Proceedings ran in a language most of the defendants did not speak. The commission sentenced 303 men to death and gave 16 prison terms. Legal scholars have judged those trials ever since to have been fundamentally unjust by the standards of the time as well as our own. The sentences went to President Abraham Lincoln, who was in the middle of the Civil War and under heavy pressure from Minnesota politicians to hang all of them. Lincoln and his advisors read the 303 trial records. He narrowed the list, first to those accused of rape, then more broadly to men accused of killing civilians rather than fighting soldiers. He approved 39 names. One man was reprieved at the last moment. The condemned were held through the winter in Mankato, a few miles from where we are standing. Picture this valley in late December. The river ice, the bare bluffs, the light going by 4 in the afternoon. A single mass scaffold was built downtown, square, designed so that all of the men would drop at once when one rope was cut. Around 4,000 spectators came. Roughly 2,000 troops were posted to keep order. On the morning of December 26, 1862, 38 Dakota men were hanged together in Mankato. It remains the largest mass execution in the history of the United States. They sang as they were led out. 2 of the men, it is now accepted, were killed by mistake, hanged in place of others through confusion over names. This happened here in this town on the bank of this river, and it is not optional to say so. The site is a park now. It is called Reconciliation Park, dedicated in 1997 to promote healing between Dakota and non-Dakota people. Its centerpiece is a buffalo carved by the local sculptor Tom Miller from a 67-ton block of limestone. In 2012, on the 150th anniversary, a memorial scroll was added listing the names of the 38. The benches around it carry the words, "Forgive everyone everything." And every year they come back. Since 2005, Dakota and Lakota riders have made the Dakota Wachixui Memorial Ride, roughly 330 miles on horseback in midwinter, arriving in Mankato on the 26th of December. A memorial run comes in on foot. They ride into the same town, in the same cold, to the same ground. It is one of the more remarkable acts of remembrance anywhere in this country. Downstream of us, where the Blue Earth River meets the Minnesota, there is a park the city formally named in 1980 at the request of Dakota people, Dakota Wachixui Makos, the land of memories. Since 1972, an annual traditional powwow, the Mankato Wasapi, has been held in Mankato, and it takes place there now, on the third full weekend of September. Wasapi means dance. It is a homecoming on purpose to this exact valley. So when we look down at that river from this railing, the correct tense is present. The Dakota are here. Their nations, their language, their names for this ground. Mankato is not an old word for a dead thing. It is the true name of the place we are looking at, and it happens to describe a seam of blue clay in a riverbank a few miles from where we are standing right now. Which brings us at last to the trail itself. This land was owned by the Williams Pipeline Company, sitting along Highway 68 west of Mankato, doing nothing in particular. Local people wanted it kept. Lloyd Vollmer, Perry Wood, the Key City Conservation Club, and a long list of volunteers worked with the company, and in 1985 the public park was dedicated. It is now a Blue Earth County Park, 65 acres of it. And they built it to be walkable by anyone. That is the quiet radicalism of this place. 1.5 miles of paved, sealed, nearly level trail out to 2 overlooks over a 200-foot valley, usable with a wheelchair or a stroller. There is a log cabin for gatherings, and self-guided stations along the way explaining the geology and the wildlife. A serious view without a serious climb. The trees deserve a word. Scattered through this wood are bur oaks estimated at 200 to 300 years old. Bur oak is the tree that stands in the doorway between prairie and forest. Its bark is corky and thick enough to survive a grass fire that kills everything else, which is exactly why the old ones are here, on the fire edge above the valley, and why they were already standing when the treaties were signed. Under them, the county fights a slow war with invasive plants, buckthorn and its allies, to keep the native ground layer alive. The forest you are walking through is a bluff woodland, holding to the slopes and ravines where the plow could never go. That is why any old timber survives in southern Minnesota at all. The flat ground became farmland. The steep ground became parks. The list of neighbors here is long. Waterfowl on the river below, songbirds through the canopy, hawks working the thermals off the bluff face, muskrats, beavers, and otters in the water, white-tailed deer and foxes. In August, when this walk was filmed, the woods are heavy and green and loud with insects. The river is low and brown, and the whole valley feels like it is holding its breath before the turn. The second platform looks a different direction, down into the valley of Minneopa Creek. It is a smaller cut, but steep, and it is doing in fast motion what River Warren did in slow motion, working its way back into the tableland. Follow that creek a short distance, and you reach the reason there is a state park next door. Minneopa Falls. Minnesota protected it in 1905, making Minneopa the third oldest state park in the state, created specifically to save a two-tiered waterfall from being lost. And in 2015, bison came back. 11 American Plains bison were released there as part of the Minnesota Bison Conservation Herd, and they now graze a few hundred acres of restored prairie, a couple of miles from this railing. So we turn back along the path. 2 miles, 39 feet of climb, and roughly 500 million years, one continental ice sheet, one catastrophic flood, one language, one war, and one execution, held inside a small county park with a paved trail and a good bench. Very little of it is signposted, and none of it is loud. It just sits here in the trees being true. The valley is too big for its river, and Mankato is too small a word for what happened in it. Both of those are worth saying out loud from a bluff. The river below has been busy filling in the flood's trench for 9,000 years, and it has barely started. The oaks have been standing here for 300. The remembering, the riding, the coming home, that is still going on every winter on the 26th of December. If you ever find yourself in southern Minnesota, go and stand on those 2 platforms. Take the 20 minutes. Look down at the water and think about how much of it there once was. Then drive into Mankato and find the park with the stone buffalo in it and read the names. Thank you for watching. Follow for more trails of the world.